What is polymorphism? Basically, the ability to behave in different ability to behave in different ways is polymorphism. Like for example, if we take ourselves, when you're in office, you work in so you behave in a different way. When you're at home, you behave different way. When you're doing some professional thing, you talk and you behave in a different way. See, so depending on the situation where you are, you change your behavior and your words, right? In the same way, here also, classes and functions can change their behavior according to the situation in the sense, like where that class has been used, when that function is being called. Depending on that scenarios, functions and classes can also change their behavior. Clear?
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, polymorphism is about changing the behavior. So what happened? Oh, just a second. Yes. So here, types of polymorphism. Polymorphism is of two types. Polymorphism is of two types: static
Mm-hmm.
polymorphism and dynamic polymorphism. So static, we can also call it as compile or early binding. Dynamic polymorphism can also be called as runtime or late binding. So there are different ways to call them. Basically, polymorphism is of two types: static and dynamic. So these polymorphisms can be achieved programmatically with the help of these things: function overloading, operator overloading, which we do not generally use here, and function overriding. Means to achieve to achieve dynamic polymorphism, we use function overriding, and to work with static polymorphism, we use function overloading. That means if you are working with a function overloading, it is a static polymorphism. If you are working with a function overriding, it is dynamic polymorphism. So there are two types of polymorphism: static and dynamic. So let's see what is this function overloading and function overriding are. And before we go to that, one small thing we have to understand is this one. What generally we call as a function signature? The function name, arguments, and the data type of arguments. Altogether, all these things we call as a function signature. So what is a function signature? Function name, number of arguments, and data types of arguments becomes the function signature. Now let's go to an example to understand function overloading. So got it? See, again I'm just recapping you. Now see, so polymorphism is of what? How many types? Static,
Dynamic.
yeah, static polymorphism, which can be achieved using function overloading.
Overloading.
And we also have one more polymorphism, that is dynamic polymorphism,
This is function overriding.
which can be done or achieved by the function overriding. Clear? So
Yes.
now we are going to discuss the static polymorphism, that is function overloading. And we have also understood what is function signature. So what does a function signature is? Nothing but what? Function signature is nothing but the function name,
Parameters.
number of parameters or data types of the parameter. These all together we call as function signature. So now let's see function overloading. So basically, why do we need and when do we need to have this function overloading? See, when you have something to do, we don't just do it because it is there. If there is some purpose, then only you will use it. So coming to that particular point, when do we generally use this polymorphism? What is the situation? So let's go to that and see it. So I'm taking a folder for the examples. Class, take a class, and this function overloading. So now let's take a class above. I've taken some math calculations class. Now in this class, what we are trying to do is I'm adding a function which will add int a and int b. Okay, so its purpose is to add the two numbers that are given and display the result. Now a plus b. Clear?
Yes.
So now we know how to call this function. We generally what we do is simply we create the object to it and we access the functions that we have in the class. That is so simple always. Now it is expecting some parameters for us to give, then console.read. Okay, now this is so simple, and when we call this, what happens? Function overloading. It will just I think this has been not changed. Let's change it. Why is it running the old example still? Let me close this and take the properties again. Why? Okay.
All right.
Just let me check with other classes. Why? Just a second. Okay. This displayed this simply whatever the function we have written, it is just displaying. This is okay. Now let's say Now the end user wanted to add two float values. Okay. Now what end user says is not only the integers but also sometimes I need to add float values also, like the decimal values. Then what do we need to do? So for this existing thing, what I can do is public void. What is the solution we generally do? Add floats. We will say something like this, and float b. Okay, simply console dot write line result is a plus b. What is happening? A plus b. Okay. Now, if we keep on changing the names of the functions, each and every time the user cannot remember all the function names, right? Now,
Right.
instead of I do something like this, what I want to do is for the same function, I will give a different behavior. Means what? Public void add. So here what I'll do is instead of this time giving the you got it now?
Yes.
So this is what we will do. Now what happens? Here the add function has got new functionality. Clear?
Yes.
What is that new functionality? Before this definition, it was adding only two integers. But from now onwards, the same add function can add how many? Also float variables. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Excuse me. So it can add the same add function can now add integer values as well as the float values. So it is overloaded, right? One
Yes.
function is doing multiple jobs here now. So that is what is we call as function overloading. Now,
It means like whenever integer is required, whenever we give integer, also it will add. Whenever we give float value, also accepts and it gives the result, right?
yes, instead of
Based on the
taking
value, it keep on changes its result automatically.
instead of taking the different functions every time, the same function will change its behavior to give us the results.
Okay.
Now see here. Now I'll simply say object1 dot add of now if you see the output here, it simply displays the given results. So now you observe here. See here, add float a comma b plus 1 overload. That means not only add of float, it also has one more overload method. The meaning of that is, you understood now?
Yes.
What is function overloading?
Yes.
Right. So here we have one more scenario where the function can be overloaded. Let's say I wanted to add 3 integers. So what I'll do, simply public void add of. Now I'm again changing the behavior of a add function, which can add 3 parameters this time. Console.writeLine addition a plus b plus c. Clear?
Yes.
Now
This
see,
this raises a question in my mind, and it could be that you're going to answer it later. I realize that, but what if you're adding an integer and a float?
one integer and the float. Yes, I'll add it like this.
Well, the reason that it comes to mind is I think of hundreds of different, combinations. Maybe not hundreds, but
Te-
many different combinations.
yeah, there could be a different combinations. See, this is just for our understanding. We have taken some scenarios,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean that in the real time you'll have all this kind of scenarios. Now
Okay, all
let me tell you, as I work in a real time, I do lot of function overloading. So in what scenario I do lot of function overloading? Let's say the functionality, the business logic inside, that means the code that we write in the function is always the same, but only one line of code will be changing depending on the parameters you pass. Now
Okay.
the same function, when I pass 2 parameters, it behaves in a different way. The same function, when I pass 3 parameters, it behaves in a different way. So what I do is, instead of taking 2 different functions, what I did is, in the same function, I made a function overloading, and whenever I pass the third parameter, it gives, like suppose say, for example, I'll tell you a scenario. Let's say I have a function which returns number of, okay, let's say returns list of employees each time. Okay, so what I'll pass to this function is pass emp param to the function. Let's suppose say, if I pass the emp parameter to the function, then that function will pass me what? Employees list. Okay. Now let's suppose say, to the same function, if I also want to get the count of the employees. Clear?
Yes.
That means count of the employees, like suppose list of the employees along with the count. Then what do? Pass emp parameter, also ask for the count. These two are parameters now. Let's assume pass these two parameters to the same function. Now what happens in this scenario? Whenever I say emp, it just gets me the list. If I also pass count parameter to it, then it will give me the count of the employees. Now you get something to with this?
Yes.
So it is like a real time kind of scenario. When do we generally do the function overloading? So function overloading you do only when you want the same function to behave or to get some different kinds of results depending on the data we are giving to it. So in this scenario, what we did is, we took just a small example of addition function, and we have taken the variables. Sorry, We have defined the parameters like this, right?
Yes.
So here again add got a new functionality of adding 3 integers. Clear?
Yes.
So basically this is what we call as function overloading. But to be more clear, one of the important thing that we have to keep in mind when you are working with function overloading is that function overloading is done in 2 situations. Basically, function overloading happens in only 2 situations. When there is a change in number of params or when there is a change in data types of the params. So you get this?